Hello and welcome to week 5. So, you should all feel proud of yourselves at this point because you have gotten over the midterm mark. And so, everything else from this point should be smooth sailing. We have 2 more weeks, or I should say, 2 more discussion board posts to go. And you have your final assignment to do, and you will be out of here. So, for week 5, this week, you will be focusing on your research paper, your final paper for the semester. Along with that, you're also going to start Albert Camus' The Stranger. And The Stranger, you will notice as you read The Stranger that it's a novel that's full of existentialist themes. So throughout the course of the semester, the reason why it provided those short stories was to sort of build up this sort of grounding foundation for critical analysis of fiction, and also to prepare you to embark on the actual full novel. And along with that, I wanted to get some short stories with some existentialist themes to provide a grounding for, sort of like this larger work of existentialism so that you have a deeper interpretation or a deeper understanding in regards to approaching this story, because you're going to find that the main character, and I'm not going to tell you who the main character is yet because I asked you that in the discussion board post, but you're going to find that the main character sort of acts differently, or does not act the way in which we are, or the like sort of society's sort of quote unquote normal expectations. And a lot of that relates to some of these like sort of larger existentialist themes, what the character might be going through. But also, I want you to think about Albert Camus as a writer as well, and the social context in which he's writing, and perhaps what he might be saying about society in this novel. And so in the week 5 content section for this week, I've included a link about Albert Camus' biography, which is pretty direct, short, and to the point, but feel free to do further research on his writing. And next week we will have an academic essay written on Camus and some of his ideas and his philosophy, along with some of the larger themes of his novel, The Stranger. So for this week, for The Stranger, I just want you to read part 1. All right, you don't have to read the whole novel, just read the first part. And then in the discussion board for this week, I will ask you to break down some of the aspects of the novel in regards to describing the plot, who is the protagonist, describing some secondary characters, and also thinking about the setting of the story. And finally, I'm going to ask you to make some predictions on what you think will happen next. And this idea, this last question about asking predictions or making predictions, is a good active reading strategy that you can use in not only your English classes, but any class in which you have to do reading. And so you can look at the text, you can look at an academic article, you can look at a story, and what's happening is that you are aware of the main points that are standing out. If it's an academic article, maybe unfamiliar vocabulary, bold print. You might be looking at technical terms that are being used. And so you stop maybe halfway through the story or halfway through the academic article or about a quarter of a way through, and you try to make predictions about what you think is going to happen next. How is this author going to argue this point even further? How is this author, or maybe how does this author feel about this side issue that's related to this, and are they going to deal with it in the essay? What is going to motivate the character to commit this particular act? Are there going to be other characters introduced? Is this story going to change the setting or the time period? And what you're doing here is that you are creating a forecast, and you are seeing if that forecast is going to be fulfilled. And the reason why that's a good active reading strategy is that not only are you asking yourself questions as you're reading the material as is, but when you think about some of the sort of forecasts that you're going to make around those questions, you read the rest of the article or the rest of the piece of fiction a little bit more actively. And sometimes your forecast will be fulfilled. Sometimes you'll be able to say, I was able to predict that. Other times it won't. But you're still going into the text a little bit more heightened, a little bit more critical, so that you can be more active in reading and understanding the actual text. So that's why I ask you that question for Albert Camus' The Stranger, but also keep that in mind. Use that active reading strategy not only for fiction, and not only for the reading material in this class, but for future classes. Also, this week, along with The Stranger, you are going to be focusing on your final assignment. So, for one of the questions in your discussion board posts, there are two sample essays, two sample researched argument essays written from students in two of my past classes. Now, a couple of disclaimers about these essays. These essays are not the model. These essays are not essays that are perfection. I'm using these essays to give you all a sense of not only how the final assignment is structured, but also how to locate and sort of identify thesis statements and get a sense of the structure and organization of an essay that looks like this. I'm also going to have you ask questions, or I'm also asking you to think about the things that we've talked about this semester in relationship to composition and in relationship to research. I want you to think about things like MLA format, grammar, sentence structure, coherence, and I want you to give, and also the requirements for the final assignment. And I want you to give these students grades. You will be surprised to know that we are, as peers, we are much harder on ourselves than professors are harder on students, than professors are on grading students' work. So I always find it fascinating to see when students look at each other's work, how that sort of critical lens is something that is really effectively foregrounded in their critique. So keep that in mind when you are looking at these sample essays, to be highly critical. But just as you're being critical about those essays, you have to be as critical about your own work as well. All right, so make sure that you keep that in mind when you not only grade these essays, but also give a rationale for the grade of those essays. And I want you to think about all of those things that we've touched on this semester. And then for the final question for the discussion board post for this week, I want you to deal with your final assignment. So basically, I'm asking you to take the current research that you have. What have you found at this point? And then I want you to tell me what your thesis statement is going to look like. Now, this is going to be a rough thesis statement. And keep in mind, it is my job to tear that thesis statement apart when I go and give you feedback on discussion board post number 5, because when I tear your thesis statement apart, then that's going to provide the opportunity for you to build a more effective, more clear thesis statement. All right. So for question number 3, you are going to develop a rough thesis statement based off of your current research. And then I want you to provide an example of how you are going to support that thesis statement. So I want you to provide a direct quote, and thoroughly analyze that direct quote and synthesize that quote. So we have the analyzing, which means breaking down that quote, breaking down that information, and then synthesis means reorganizing that information for your purposes. And in this case, your purpose is to support your thesis statement. All right. So those are the main things that you're going to do for your discussion board post for this week. If you have any questions or comments or concerns, please let me know. Once again, happy reading, happy writing, and I will see you in cyberspace.